You're listening to the Higher Calling Podcast. I'm Pete Newsome. I'm joined again by Ricky Baez, and we are your source for all things hiring, staffing, and recruiting. Ricky, how are you today?
I am doing great, Pete. Living the dream, my friend. Living the dream.
The dream. The dream.
Right.
You're the dream.
I I don't know, man. I could be Freddy Krueger to some people. It's all
Well,
right.
I didn't say you were a good dream. Just said you're the dream. So
Right. Fair enough.
that's
Touche.
that's what we'll go with.
Got it.
So, Ricky, today we're going to talk about staffing agencies. And now I'm a staffing company owner. You're an HR professional. So let me just get this out of the way. Why do you hate us?
Whoa. You just kicking the door down there, Navy SEAL. Look, I don't hate you guys. I've had bad experiences, and maybe I'm going to talk myself out of it because I'm one of the first to say you should never treat a future relationship based on previous experiences, right? But we're human beings. But Pete, I got to tell you, I've used them about 7 years ago for a call center over in here in Florida, and man, some promises were made that were not. They just were not kept. Were not kept.
No. So,
No.
okay. So a bad experience. But I think there's also this sentiment that exists that I know that a lot of HR professionals see us as the adversary instead of an ally. And that is a source of frustration to a lot of staffing professionals. And it's a perspective that I'd like to try to change. I do try to change wherever I can. I think I've been successful a number of times throughout my career, but it's still a prevalent thought. And it's one that I understand at some level, but I also completely reject that idea because we're here to be an asset. We're here to be a resource and an ally of HR, never the adversary.
Is it HR that has an issue, or more specifically, corporate America recruiters that have an issue with staffing agency? Because from my perspective, if I was a recruiter and I'm doing my job and I see my boss bringing in a third party, I'm going to start thinking that I'm failing
That's right.
from a
Okay,
corporate recruiter
so
perspective, right?
so HR broadly, right? Depending
Mhm.
on the size of the organization, talent acquisition professionals in particular, and not all. This is
Yeah.
I'm having fun with this. Of course, it's a general statement, but there's also a lot of truth to it as well.
Yeah, there is. There is. It's and again, I'm here to say that there is not. I think it's fair because the person might be listening right now that I explained the full story. So because as soon as I said, I'm like, oh man, she's gonna hate me. No, but look, I was overseeing the HR operation for a huge call center in a city north of Orlando, Lake Mary, Florida, and it's a call center that's within 5 miles radius of 5 other call centers. So we needed to hire 200 people relatively quickly. And we were having a hard time. I had a recruitment team. We were having a hard time picking from the same well as four other businesses were.
Sure.
But the staffing just came and made all these promises. You're going to need help with the amount of people we're going to send your way. Get your onboarding ready, get all this ready. Man, we pulled out all the stops. Crickets. I think we got maybe 30% of the people that we were promised, and about 50% of them stayed for about half of the time. So it was a huge failure. And oh, my boss, let me tell you, Pete, I'll take my lickings, man. My boss, and before I gave her an opportunity to come talk to me in my office, I went to her office. I'm like, Lena, here's what I'll say her name because she and I get along great. I'm like, I messed up. Here you go. Here's what happened. So, yeah, I had a big learning opportunity.
There you go.
That's what I'm going to call it.
So we know that not all. First of all, I will say I've never made a promise other than if we work together long enough, things will go wrong. That's the only promise I've ever made. Because when people are
That's
your
pretty good.
product,
Yeah.
as they are for a staffing company, you don't control a lot of things that happen. But you do control what comes out of your mouth. And so if you promise anything, you better be able to back it up.
Oh man. Yeah.
But I think today I'd like to spend time on what makes a staffing company valuable to an organization because we serve a very important purpose as a supplement to what the internal team can do, as you just described. And we certainly don't want adversarial relationships. We want to be seen as a partner. Now that word gets overused, we know that, but it really is a partnership when it's done right because the staffing company is an extension of the organization. We are representing our clients out in the market. And so if that's not a partnership, in the business world, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
When we're recruiting on behalf of another company. So let's spend time on that today
Okay.
and just start with the basics of what a staffing agency really is. Now we go by a few different terms depending on who you are. Sometimes organizations and sometimes all these phrases are blended together. Now I could do a whole show. You and I could talk for an hour about what differentiates a headhunter from a staffing company, from a recruiting firm, from a temp agency. To me, these all have their own time and place to be used. But for this purpose, let's just call staffing company an organization who works on behalf of a third party or on behalf of their client to recruit candidates for a need, be it
Okay.
direct employees or contract employees. So we'll just use it in that phrase if that's okay.
No, perfect. I'll give you the HR director's definition, and it's this: thank God, right? Because the last thing I want to focus on is the 5 requisition from engineering that just got to my desk that never told me about, that should have been filled 5 months ago, and all these other things coming in. So now, 7 years later, owning my own business now and dealing with clients, I see how this can be a lifesaver. It can be a lifesaver for small to medium-sized businesses who just don't have the bandwidth, right?
That's right. Yeah, and there's a number of reasons why we're needed. One is exactly what you just said. Time.
Mhm.
Recruiting when it's done right is it's quite an effort, and you may get lucky, which you can't rely on. You may be Google, which you're probably not, in terms of having a line out the door. So even in a candidate's or even an employer's market where you can post an ad and receive hundreds of applications, we know that happens today. We talked about it the other day on our last podcast about resume reading.
Mhm.
But that's the problem. You receive so many applications, you can either ignore them, which doesn't help fill your job, or if you try to look at all of them individually, you don't have time to do that, not effectively. So the first thing I would say that a staffing company contributes in terms of value is saving time
Mm.
to those who don't have it, because this is all we do all day, every day we recruit. The other thing that we do is provide expertise that you may not have.
Mm.
And this engineering job that you mentioned, well, you're going to have to get your arms around the criteria for it, understand what a qualified candidate really looks like in that space. Well, if you're an HR professional and you wear a lot of different hats, it's understandable that you wouldn't have much depth of understanding of these individual roles. And so you're starting from scratch, and that's a learning curve that can be a painful process, right? And again, add time to the equation, where if you bring in a staffing company, this is what we do all day, every day. We take new positions. We work to understand the criteria involved in the hiring process. We look to understand as best we can what a qualified candidate looks like, and then we go. Now, the third thing I'll say that's valuable that we contribute is the tools and resources. This is the world we're in all day, every day. So even if you're a competent recruiter as in an HR department, a corporate HR department, you still get pulled in lots of other directions. You go to corporate meetings, you have to do all the good corporate citizen stuff, whatever that is, right? You know this
Corporate
world
citizen.
better than I do. Well, we have blinders on, right? Our
Yeah.
team in an organization like Four Corner Resources that is a staffing company, this is what we do, right?
Yeah.
This is all we do. We don't get involved in all the other HR stuff, right? That comes along. Not when
That's what I'm
things are
here.
going well anyway. We don't.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained, and the goal is to deliver as few resumes as possible, as few candidates as possible, as few interviews as possible to get that hire. And that is what we do because we screen candidates at a very deep level. only giving you the right one, hopefully as few as possible. Ideally, that is one in return.
Now, you said something pretty interesting. You said that that from an HR perspective, when you're in HR, you get pulled in all these different ways. You have so many different hats, and when you have to recruit for an engineering position, you kind of, like you said, you got to wrap your arms around it and get to know that role. Now, from a staffing perspective, is one company have different departments on who recruits for what, or is it like a generalist style type of a business model? I'm not that familiar with that. I mean,
So
can you tell me how
every
that works?
organization, it works differently. There's some very niche companies that may only work for one specific job title. That is common out there. I'll just use one that's obvious to everyone, which is nursing. There are
Mm.
companies that do nothing but nursing. There's companies that only do travel nursing in particular.
Oh,
There are
even more
companies
granular.
that
Okay.
only do nurse anesthetist, for example, right? That can be
Wow.
its own specialty. You look in the IT space, there are companies that do one specific kind of developer. That's all they'll recruit for. And that is their whole business is built around that niche. So it depends. Usually companies, I would say for the most part, those that aren't that specific, tend to stay in a number of places, either like IT, for example, or
Yeah.
finance or marketing, or there's blue collar recruiting firms that do day labor work or construction positions. Usually those don't cross over. So there is a baseline of expertise that exists in that department or industry generally when you start recruiting, because the important thing from that is that you're not starting from scratch. You're starting,
Mhm.
with the car already rolling down the road, so to speak, versus having to figure out how to get into first gear, which is where that efficiency comes from. So staffing companies usually have a large database if they've been in business for any length of time. I think, for us, we have some close to 1 million resumes in our database right now, with
Wow.
notes on the candidates, with details of what their compensation looks like, what kind of job that they would leave the one that they're in for, what their career goals and objectives are, what kind of commute they're interested in, whether they want to work exclusively remotely. So these are all the things beyond the resume that, when done right, the recruiter, the staffing company, is already in tune with. And that's why there's such an advantage of speed when it comes to starting from scratch as a corporate recruiter.
So I think I think I have the best way to describe that, right? So if I go to my kitchen right now, I got a leaky faucet, I'm not a plumber. Instead of wasting 5 hours on YouTube trying to figure it out, making 5 to 6 trips to Home Depot because I bought the wrong tool, I just shell out the money for an expert to come in, and he or she knows exactly what needs to happen, does the job, and leaves. Is that
Yes,
a good analogy?
that is that. Well, we'll take it. Now, you mentioned
We'll
something
take it.
else that I want to touch on before we go too far by it, in terms
Yeah.
of what the advantages are of working with a third party.
Mhm.
In this scenario you described in your former life of having to staff a call center where four others, probably similar pay, similar schedule,
Mhm.
similar work environment, you were competing against all of them due to professional courtesy. Maybe now you could tell me I'm wrong in this, but generally speaking, you probably couldn't aggressively pursue those employees who were working at those other places. You couldn't call in there. You couldn't, uh, you know, uh, go right to their doorstep, so to speak. But a staffing company can, because we are incented to aggressively recruit on behalf of our clients, and we don't have to apologize for that. We don't have to consider those professional courtesies. So that's often an advantage.
Look, I'll say this here. We may or may not have been involved in guerrilla marketing. And because we've heard through the grapevines that there is a call center down the street who was just not treating their employees right. And I may or may not have gone to Staples and bought some 5x7s and put in them 500 cars in the parking lot.
Well,
I'm
good
just
for you if you did that. Most won't, right? So that
most
is,
won't. Yeah.
like I said, it's typically a value that the third party recruiting company can deliver, but
Boy, that
not
works. Let me
always.
tell you. It
Um,
definitely worked.
I used to be asked all the time when I was selling, why, where do you get your candidates? Right? Where do they
Mm.
come from? And my answer would be from everywhere that isn't a client today. That's it. That is where my candidates come
That's a
from.
place.
Huh?
That's a place.
Anywhere that's not my current client, that's who we're recruiting from. Right? Because we are
That's a
very
wide
proactive.
net. That's a
It's
wide net, though, right?
what's that?
Isn't that a wide net? Because didn't you say now? Okay, okay. You know what? Let me ask this. Let me ask about Four Corner Resources specifically.
Okay.
At Four Corner Resources, it's are there now? I know the recruiters very well. I know the managers very well. But primarily it's IT staffing, right? And is there a niche for Four Corner Resources primarily that they staff for? I thought it was IT, right?
Yeah, we do a lot of IT. That's what we were founded
Yeah.
to do. But as our business has evolved, we've branched out into other areas. We do a lot of finance, we do a lot of marketing, we do a lot of call center, we do a lot of administrative, we do legal, we do HR. So pretty much anything you would find in a
Pretty much got it.
corporate setting, that's what we
Yeah.
recruit for. But our core has always been IT.
So now that said, this is something that I learned once I started working with you is I thought it was just staffing, but there's a lot more to it from a staffing perspective because there's staffing, which means that you hire them, you put the employees under your contract, and then you put them to work over there. So they're a contractor for your clients, but you take the payroll and tax burden for that employee, right?
That's right. So contract staffing, it works exactly that way, where by any I was going to say technically, but it's not really technical at all. It is by any standard of measurement, the employee, the contractor is they're our employee. They're our W-2 employee more often than not.
Yeah.
So we have all the responsibilities that any employer would when it comes to payroll taxes, and insurances and healthcare. So any government mandated requirement, we have that
Yay.
burden and responsibility. So that is the nature of the relationship between the contract employee working at the client site, or a lot of those are virtual now, of course.
Yeah.
And so the way we make where our income comes from is this in our profit is effectively the difference between what we pay the contract employee
Mhm.
plus taxes and fees that we have to add on to that, of course, like any employer would, subtracted from the hourly rate that we bill our client. And that's where our profit comes from. So we pay
Mhm.
a labor rate and we have a marked up bill rate. And the difference, again, is how we earn a living. So
Well, I was going to say that may sound a lot to some people, but that is a huge pro for the organization, right? Because if I own a business, I own an engineering business and I have a project that I need labor for, right? And I'm only going to use people for about 6 months. Why not go to experts and say, look, I'll pay you X amount of money. I don't have to worry about taxes, benefits, nothing. And if I don't like how they work, I'll just cancel the contract, right? There's no progressive discipline process they will have to follow because they're not an employee. So I know that sounds like it's a lot of money changing hands, but to the size of the business owner, that's a huge cost savings and a huge headache that they don't have to deal with.
no, you're
Yeah.
100% correct. There's a big convenience factor. It is probably
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Did you record that? Pete said I'm 100% correct. I need that amplified through everybody's speakers in my zip code. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. I just had to make sure
did
that
we
my team
cover
got
that?
that.
Are
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
good?
Yes, sir. Got it. Sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
But you're 100% correct that
Again.
convenience factor. We've got it. It's on record.
Got it.
It is an unfortunate part of the scenario, but it is reality that not every employee who's hired is going to work out.
Mm.
Not every duration that was expected on the front end is going to come to fruition that way. And no one likes to be fired. We know that. No one likes to do the terminating either. Well, you don't have to when you're an employer using a contract staffing company. You make the call to the third party, to the staffing company, and the staffing company has to handle the terminations. So
I have an amazing idea, Pete. I think you and I should do a LinkedIn webinar, right? Talking, but it's not called the apprentice, it's called the contractor. And when somebody, they'll do all these different activities and then we come back to the table, you and I would review. And instead of saying you're fired, we're going to say you're canceled.
You're
It's
canceled. I
you're
don't know.
canceled.
I don't know if I want to be associated with that word
No? Oh, okay,
in
fine. Yeah.
particular right now, but,
Okay.
or I don't know if I want, so you're going to play the role of Donald Trump in that, because I don't know
Yeah.
that I
I'm
want
like,
that.
you're canceled.
That was that was a popular thing 10 years ago. Right now, for something tells me it wouldn't be quite so popular. I don't know.
No,
Maybe I'm wrong.
you know what? Obviously, I'm joking, but but you're right, Pete. It is easier though. It is easy for an organization to just say, you know what, I'm done. This is not working. And when I first started working with you, that was new to me, right? Because when I worked in corporate America, you don't just do that. You've got to go through a process. And that was a huge learning curve for me. I'm like, oh, that's right. This is a contract. You can cancel it for whatever reason. I just wasn't used to that. So
Yeah, it's one of those things where everyone knows the deal, right? And it doesn't happen most of the time, thank goodness. But in uncertain economic times like we're in now, budgets get cut, and those phone calls come. There's been periods where I didn't want to answer by phone because I knew any call that came was going to be bad news that I didn't want. And I'm
yeah.
referring to 2008, you know March time frame when COVID hit, when
That was in 2008.
contractors were getting cut left and right because employees everywhere were getting cut. And
Mm.
so those are no matter how many times you do it, it's a call that no one likes to make.
Yeah.
But I have to say it is a pro of using a contract staffing company, because you don't have to deal with it. It is one less burden on you as an employer when it's just a phone call away without any reason. Now we still like to give those reasons, and truth be told, as the staffing company in this, we lose out too, right? So
Yeah.
the employee loses their source of income, we lose our source of income as well. And so believe me when I say we don't make a habit of working with companies who would do that regularly,
Mm.
right? We would avoid them at all costs. We
Yep.
understand circumstances. What we don't want to get involved with is an organization who doesn't realize the true life impact of that kind of behavior.
So that's contract staffing. So how big of a difference is contract to hire? Now I understand what it is, right? Contract to hire, you started a contract, and then if they like you, they'll keep you.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different
Yeah.
ways to look at that. One
Yeah.
is what I consider to be project-based work or seasonal work, where there is an end time that is hard and fast, or at least it's known to everyone. When the project's over, the work is finished. When the season ends, whether it's a holiday season, a summer season, we used to do a lot of recruiting for a company that used to have to ramp up for hurricane season. Doesn't matter
Mm.
what the season ends is, when it ends, so does the work. And so a lot of contracts operate that way. Now, some could be very long, some could be years in duration, but there is no expectation that there will be hesitate to use the word permanent, because we know it's not actually permanent,
Yep.
but direct employment at the end of the contract period. On the other hand, there is very often where, rather than hire the employee directly to the company's payroll, they'll start that individual out as a contract employee through the staffing company. Again, sometimes every variation of this exists. Sometimes it is a hard and fast time frame, a 3 to 6 or 9 or 12-month contract, at which point that individual will be expected to convert to a direct employee.
Mm.
So in those scenarios, the contract employee understands the deal going in and is
Yeah.
expecting, in those cases, to have the opportunity to convert to be a permanent employee, and the employer is expecting that individual to come on their payroll after the contract period. So the reason to do that, if in case you were going to ask, is it's a great on-ramp for a number of reasons. It's, call it a try and buy period. That's kind of a crude term, but that's used a lot. Or it's an opportunity for the staffing company to be paid incrementally rather than in a lump
Ah,
sum, which is what would then be considered a direct hire scenario,
that's right.
where
Yeah.
right off the bat, the employee who's selected is hired directly onto the employer's payroll, never on the contract staffing company's payroll. And so the staffing company in those cases make their money with a lump sum fee. That's
Yeah.
often a big check to write. That's when we get into these other terms of headhunting, for example, or retained searches. It's a different world than contract staffing. Um, and so it's sort of a best of all worlds scenario at times for that contract to hire scenario to work.
See, so that's really good to understand, because how I saw it, I honestly saw contract staffing and contract to hire as the same thing. Just one spelled it out more. Because even if it's a contract staffing, if the contracts end and they come to you and say, "Hey, we want to hire this person," you work out a deal and you take that person off your payroll, send it over, right? So I'm sure there's a deal behind the scenes that
And
gets
that
struck with that,
happens a
right?
lot too,
Yeah.
where
Okay.
the situations do change, as we talked about a few minutes ago. And sometimes it's open ended, right? Sometimes it's what I call contract to maybe hire, right? Like we don't have headcount. We think we might at some point. We have the need right now. We can hire as a contractor and let's
Mm.
see what happens. Where in those scenarios, it's a lot more uncertain. There's no hard and fast expectation on either side. And
Mm.
so what's important in these scenarios is open communication, where what you don't want is for the individual whose livelihood revolves around this, forget the employer, forget the staffing company. There's a real person involved who needs to know the deal going in and
Yeah.
make a decision accordingly. So if I'm recruiting you, Ricky, and I say, hey, you're going to work a contract for 6 months, at which time you'll be able to convert to a direct employee of our client, and we talk about the salary you would be converted at, and everyone's happy. Well, you're going to count on that, right? And that's
Hmm.
going to weigh in to whether you accept the
Got it.
job or are interested in moving forward in with the opportunity. So you don't want to say it if you don't mean it. Obviously, the other
Yeah.
scenario could be though, hey Ricky, we think there's an opportunity for you to convert to a direct employee. Our client has budget and can foresee work for the next 6 months. Gets kind of cloudy after that. And so
Yeah.
depending on your situation, that may still sound appealing to you, or it may be reason to turn down the opportunity if you're gainfully employed somewhere, and that's a risk you may not be willing to take. But man, if there's myriad situations and examples of that, and so I'll say again, it really just comes down to being open on all sides and
Got it.
communicating accordingly, so nobody's surprised by how things work out.
Got it. All right, thank you. But that really does help, right? It's especially for everybody listening, and for me now that I've got to work with you for a few years, and I better understand the different tentacles that the octopus has, because
Well,
it
look,
really does have a lot.
I'll touch on a couple of things since I mentioned, and then we'll move quickly past, or we
Yeah.
could stay here all night. I mentioned retained search, and so that is a service that a company like ours will offer for executive positions. So
Mhm.
hard to niche positions where going in, everyone acknowledges that the candidate pool is small. Sometimes it's an executive search. That phrase gets blended in a lot too. So you can have a retained search that's not executive, right? You could have in theory an executive search that's not retained, but oftentimes they will go together. And the way a retained agreement works or retained search is the employer pays a percentage of the fee up front for the search to be initiated. And so if the recruiting firm is going to invest a lot of time in that effort,
Mhm.
more than normal, right? Because the candidate pool's small, then it makes sense that they would require some portion of the payment up front. Because what you run the risk of in the world of contract staffing, everything you do almost is on a contingency basis. Meaning I'm working for free effectively as a staffing company until I deliver a candidate, not just that you've hired, but they've walked in the door and they start working. So if you just run that out, there's a lot of time that can be spent,
Yeah.
and there's the likelihood that you're not even successful if you're client doesn't end up hiring your candidate, all that work,
Was
has no income behind it. So a retained search is one where you ask for a portion of the payment up front. And that's been really prevalent, more so in the last 6 months as it's been a really tight candidate market. That's
yeah.
you see that happening for lower level jobs. Um, there's something that's called recruitment process outsourcing, or RPO, where the organization effectively hands over the recruiting effort to the third party, where they take that on and they really truly act as an extension of their client, representing him in the market. And then the last thing I'll mention is payrolling. And payrolling is effectively, for various reasons at times, where there's a known individual who our client wants to hire, but they don't have the means of carrying that individual on their payroll. Maybe it has to do with benefits or compensation or whatever headcount issues they have internally, where we as a third party can take on that person as an employee who then works on our client site. So
Wow.
a lot of different flexible options.
Yeah.
I know that's a lot at once, but I wanted to at least put them out there since we alluded to them earlier.
So let's say I own this huge corporation. I got 400 employees. That's not that big, but I got 400 employees, right? And I need to recruit. I know that I'm about to get busy here in a bit. What are some of the things? How do I know I need a third party staffing agency? How do I
Well,
know that?
when your hiring needs can't be met, right? There's a lot of things that could lead to that. It could be a spike, as I think you were just describing.
Yeah.
I just picked up a big project that requires resources and talent that I don't have. Do you have the means to fill those positions internally? If yes, great. You don't need a staffing company. If no, well, you probably do, because if it means lost revenue or a decreased customer service or putting too much burden on your internal staff who's already working for you, well, there's a big downside to each of those things. So if you can't keep up with your hiring needs, it sounds like what's the Jeff, if you might be a redneck guy, you might need a staffing
Jeff Foxworthy.
company if you can't keep up with your hiring, or project-based needs. Ricky, if you have a new project that's coming online and you need technical talent to do it, that you're not going to need indefinitely, right? Once the development effort's done, you don't need those people anymore. That would be a great reason to reach out. So, or if you just don't have the expertise, right? There's so many reasons why a position may stay open longer than the business would like for it to. And for any of those reasons, you should ask for help, because you're losing money if you don't. Odds
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's so now hearing you talk about it and just dice it down like that and dissect it the way you did, you're selling time.
Sure.
That's what you're selling. You're
Time and
because
expertise.
well, yeah. I mean, expertise, which I mean, could equal time, right? Because
Ultimately, yeah.
with time, somebody can become an expert, but they don't have time for that.
That's such a great way to put it, right? Back
Yeah.
to what we were
Yeah.
talking about in terms of we're in this mode all day, every day. And if you're only going to put on this recruiting hat intermittently, you're starting from scratch. And
Yeah.
that is going to take a huge investment of time to catch up.
Yeah.
Right. And why would you want to expend that time? You wouldn't. So, and we haven't even talked about the resources and tools at our disposal as a third party, because this is all our business does. We're suited for that. I always use the oil change analogy in these scenarios. Is you could change your own oil, but you're going to make a mess. You may not do it right. It's going to take you longer. Is that worth I don't know, what is an oil change these days? Is it?
I don't know, like 40, $50, is it?
Gosh, I remember when they used to advertise $14.99 for Jiffy Lube.
Yeah,
I
me
guess.
too.
I
Now
guess
they got
I don't.
special organic fuel that has names. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I drive an electric car, so I don't have to worry
Well,
about
there
that
you
very
go.
much. But
Yeah.
but so times have changed. But yes, do you want to change your own oil, right, and get messy and take time and maybe do it wrong, or do you want to go to an expert who can do it very efficiently? And so, do you have to hand them the money to do it? Yes, but if you put a value on how your time would otherwise be spent, it probably would work out in a way where you shouldn't try to do it yourself. Same thing with recruiting.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Wow. How do you find them though? I mean, because I know you got LinkedIn, right? And let's say I've got that product, and I know it's. I don't know if I say it right now, people are gonna know. I'm not gonna look at the yellow pages. And for those of you who do not know, years ago, we used to get these big blocks of paper, a book with little thin pages where people would advertise their business in. So I mean, if I go on LinkedIn or if I Google staffing agency, I'm gonna have like millions come up, right? So what are some of the things I need to look for to know this is a legit organization?
Sure. Well, ask for referrals. That's always a great thing to
Okay.
do of others who've used staffing companies before, had good experiences. Look at who is providing thought leadership in the space, who is
Mm.
out there publicly. Look, go to companies' websites if you find them, and you can tell pretty quickly the quality of an organization based on their digital presence. So look at that, see who their candidates are, ask what kind of companies they work with today. Do they have testimonials on their site? Do they have the company logos on their site? That's a pretty big indication of how well a company's doing, and a good indication of how well they could do for you. And then I always recommend going to clearlyrated.com. The Clearly Rated is a site that exists to rate staffing companies. They do some other things, but that's one of their
Really?
core uh, objectives, where it is independent. Are you looking it up right now? I can
Yeah, I
see
am.
that
I
you're
am.
looking it up. But Clearly Rated, the way they work is they allow candidates and employers who've worked with staffing companies to rate them independently.
Oh wow, and
So
HR
that's
services
probably
too.
as good as any of a source to go to find out how good, who's good in your market, who's good in your
Yeah,
industry. It's You can slice and dice it that way.
I never knew that.
Or if you're listening to this, just use Four Corner Resources. I mean, that's probably the safest route to go
Yeah.
if I'm if I'm being completely transparent. And here's what I'll commit to anyone listening: if we're not a good fit for you, we'll give you guidance on who is, because one of the things that we operate based on is we don't take on any position we don't intend to fill. So that means we end up turning down a lot of business if it's not a good fit. Because if you think back to what I said earlier, most of the time we're working on a contingency basis. So it does us no good to take on a role that's not going to lead to
Oh,
revenue.
Pete.
And that doesn't help our reputation. It doesn't help our expenses internally. It's not why we're in business. So I will also back that up by saying, don't call a staffing company unless you're serious about using them and ready to hire. Because when we're asked to fill a job, we spend a lot of time qualifying our client, the prospect, right? The prospective client, to make sure that they're committed and serious. Because once we say go, once they tell us to go, we're heads down until we produce the candidate. That's how we operate, because
Mm.
we intend to fill every position we take on. So just know that it becomes a very serious thing when you ask a staffing company for their time and effort,
Yeah.
because that's the only way they make money.
So you said something that I drill into the heads of my students every semester, every single semester, when when we start talking about filling that business need, how to start a business, how to become an entrepreneur. I always tell them, find solve a problem, but don't look to get a sale. Look to help your customer. That's if you look to help your customer, the sale will come organically. If you look to sell first, you are going to put some people off. And you know who was good at that? Tony Shea. It's the late Tony Shea, because he has since passed away. He was the CEO of Zappos.
Oh, of
And
course.
yeah,
Yeah.
when he was at a conference back before Amazon bought Zappos, he was at a conference with other CEOs, and he was telling this other CEOs how his company would help employees with whatever, and they were going back and forth. And one of the CEOs called his bluff. He's like, "So if I call this 800 number right now, and I ask for directions for pizza, they're gonna help me." Now, this was at a time before smartphones weren't as good as they are right now to find something. So yeah, they'll do that. So he called the 800 number and says, "Hey, I'm interested in some Nikes, size 12. But look, I'm in San Francisco. I don't have access to a phone book. I'm looking for a piece to join. Here's my hotel. Can you help me?" The guy helped him out. The guy helped them out, right?
That's
I mean,
great.
come on. If you do that with any other organization, like, I'm not gonna, and then hang up, yeah, you're not focusing on your customer, but that shows if you're there to help the customer, regardless of a sale, the right customer will pay more for your services and what you have to buy than anywhere else because of how you deal with customers.
I love it.
It
That
works beautifully. I could
it
be
is
in that all night. I'm
beautiful.
sorry.
That's a great
So,
story.
yeah.
So, Ricky, isn't it from an HR standpoint? What do you think are some what would you say are some misconceptions? Is there anything that I've mentioned today that has surprised you? Maybe not you in particular because you've worked with us so
Mhm.
closely, but other HR
I
professionals may think we operate in a different way than we do. Or maybe I could ask, what misconception did you have prior to working closely with us a couple of years ago when we first connected?
So the first misconception I said it earlier is from the recruiter's perspective, right? When the recruiter comes when a recruiter is it's working on something and help is brought in from a leader's perspective, you should have a conversation with that recruiter. That way he or she doesn't feel like they're being put to the side. So that's one misconception, is that they think that the current recruiter is not working. When at the end of the day, it's a tool, it's assistance. And if you bring in a third party agency to help out with a class that you need to start in a couple of months, it allows you, the recruiter, to focus on other things. Again, you're being bought time. Right. So that's to me, that's one of the biggest misconceptions from an HR leadership perspective. I don't know if I had a misconception. I'm just being honest here. I just had a bad taste in my mouth from my previous experience, but I
Okay.
know that's not all of them, right? But I'm not gonna forget, because I learned a valuable lesson, Pete. I learned that if the offer is too good, right? It's too good to be true. Then it probably is too good to be true. And I should have asked more questions. I'm like, where is this magical well of candidates that you have access to that I don't? Right? Help me understand. So it's, I think, again, it's not a misconception. It's more of a learning opportunity of what questions to ask later on. And now I know, working with you, I know exactly what to ask.
Where do you think, when you look back on that scenario where they didn't produce, do you have where do they go wrong?
I think they were so excited to get this contract that they started throwing anything to the wall. It was a lot. It was a lot.
So
It was about 200 employees.
were they sending bad candidates, or were they not sending candidates at all?
Nothing, nothing, nothing. It's,
You said
I mean,
crickets earlier, so I
yeah,
guess.
crickets, crickets. I mean, just a few showed up, and Pete, I pulled out all the stops, man. I pulled out all the stops, and I had egg on my face, and I'm glad that happened, because now I know going forward what to ask, and I'm not doing this contract then
All
if
right.
that's the case.
So what would you ask differently if in that scenario, knowing now, right, what you didn't know then, if you went back with all the knowledge that you have, other than just saying, "Hey, I know you're not going to produce," what what could you have said to vet them better?
What I would have said is, make believe we signed this contract a month ago, and I need 50 resumes right now. Let me see them. Let me see them. Let me have my team take a look at them, and if they're more relevant to the role that we're looking to hire for, then yes, you've got legit people, right? But if you have a hard time producing a sample, you're gonna have a hard time doing the job.
Yeah,
Right?
no, I mean, I guess in a scenario where an organization says, "I want you to help me fill this position or positions," right? Doesn't matter whether it's one or 50, it's all relative, that no one else has been able to fill, that I haven't been able to fill. I've used this company and that company. I've exhausted my resources. Now I expect you to pull a needle out of a haystack.
Yeah.
That's not the business we're in. I would tell you. I would say you have a problem that I may not be equipped to solve. So I would need to dig into that, and I would dig into that by saying, okay, tell me exactly what you've done. Well, I posted it on Indeed. Okay, that I can. No surprise there, right? That you haven't been able to fill the position. It's just been a matter of posting job ads. Who else did you use I already tried to use staffing companies. That's a common one that we hear
Yeah.
with companies coming to us for the first time. Depending on who they tell me they've used, I'll make a determination on
Ah.
how good of an effort I think that has been applied. Not all staffing companies are created equally.
Yeah.
So if they give me a reputable company or two and say they've done everything they can, I've done everything I can, now I expect you to deliver. I'm out, right? Like that's not,
Yeah.
again, we're not magicians. I would say you probably aren't paying enough. You probably have a broken process. Your expectations aren't in line with the market. I don't know what's wrong yet, but I know something's wrong. And I'm not here to spin my wheels trying to solve it.
Yep.
That's not a reason to use a new staffing company. That's a reason to check yourself in what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, there
So
you go.
use us when you at the forefront of the scenario, right? Use us when you anticipate a problem. You anticipate a limitation on being able to fill the positions that you have open with the right quality and the right time frame. Don't come to us after you've exhausted all your options and expect us to clean up your mess. We're not doing it.
I just want to tell you from an HR perspective, same thing. Same thing. Hey, I need some help. I'm like, oh, so what happened? I don't know. So we're halfway through a lawsuit. Nope, I'm out. I'm
Exactly.
out. It's too late for me, man.
Yeah,
So I'm with you.
exactly. Okay, so did we cover? I know we've covered a lot. We could probably drill down into any of these things into anything individually. Any more questions that you think we may have missed?
I'm looking. I mean, the only one I really wanted to drive home is the difference between contract to hire and contract staffing,
Okay,
because I think I get that question so much in class, right? What's that
really
difference?
interesting.
I do. I really
Okay,
do. Well, in my recruitment, selection, and retention class, right? I do get that a lot, and I do a good job at explaining it. I haven't had that much experience in it, but I know what it is. That's what I'm saying for the next recruitment selection and retention class. I know we keep talking about it, but we're talking about it for years for you to come to class and you talk to my students, but
I'll be
it's
there.
going to happen.
Yeah, so it's really intention. I think that's if you had to sum it up in one word, the
Mhm.
intention for this relationship, this working relationship to end after the contract period, whatever the contract period is based on, is over, or is it intended to be indefinite,
Mm,
or maybe ultimately result in the individual converting to a direct employee. So that's really it is. It starts off the same. The parameters are the same. It's really about what happens at the
mm.
end of the contract. Do they go on, or do they go on about their way somewhere else, or do they stay on as a direct employee? So once you get your arms around the concept, I think it makes it's easy to understand.
It's an awesome world, man. I got to tell you, now that I see it from both sides, especially how many different services an organization like this can offer, I think it's a huge headache saver. And
Yeah,
that's my new word, my new phrase.
headache saver.
Save
I
yourself a
like it.
headache
Well, it
for later.
can be, and it should be, if the perspective is a correct one, and
Mhm.
the role that the staffing company plays versus the role that they don't play. We're not trying to take anyone's job, right? We're trying to be. We exist to be a supplement, an
Mm.
extension, a resource, a partner, all of those things. And when a relationship's healthy, it's seen that way, and,
Yeah.
and it flows that way. And there's open and transparent communication, and each party's accessible, and each party respects the position of the other. So, and I think what I'm just described is any healthy relationship that those things have to be in place for. But I think the point of all of this is there's a great need at times to call a staffing company,
Mhm.
um, identify when those needs exist, try to do that as early in the process as possible, develop relationships that can become partnerships, right? They don't
Yeah.
have to start off that way. It has to be earned. That
That's
trust
right.
has to be earned, and reliability, because that's really what our value is. You got to be able to trust us and rely on us. You experienced the organization that you couldn't trust or rely on. Well, okay. I contend that that's probably because you said it. They were too excited with the opportunity without stopping to realize that they have to deliver to make any money. They have to deliver to continue. It's not about getting a contract signed. That's where too many make a mistake early on. Is, hey, I have an opportunity to fill these positions. Well, that's meaningless, right? Until you actually fill them. So make sure you have a mechanism and a path to actually fill them, not just a potential to fill them. And that's how success happens.
So excellent. And you know what? For the record, I get along with the person even still today, because we still talk about it today. And I'm going to call her after this and say, hey, I talked about you.
Oh, well,
she's going to hear it.
Is she still in staffing, or has she moved on?
She's still in staffing.
Okay. Well, maybe you shouldn't call her.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I should give her a heads up. I ain't saying no names. So
I don't even know who it is. I'm going to find out when we hang up. So let's do that now. We'll say goodbye so I can figure out who this the villain of the story is. So
that's right.
All right. Well, Ricky, we did it. We beat the horse on this. I'm sure there's more to come.
We've gone so long without beating a horse.
Well, we were due. We were due.
We were overdue. Got it. All right.
We did not cancel that word yet, but if you have questions, hit us up, please. If you have comments on this show or topics that you want us to talk about going forward, we'd love to hear from you. And that is Hire Calling, HireCalling at fourcornerresources.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again.
Have a good one, folks. Good night.